Just like we used our values, our vision, and our mission for our strategic objectives, we do the same with our policies, our standards, and our procedures. Not quite as much as we did with the plans, but our policy standards and procedures are influenced by them. They are also influenced by the laws, the regulations that we have to follow. They are very high level and they are not specific. And they in general fall into three categories. Regulatory policies, those are the ones that our organization have to follow based on the industry that we are in. For the hospitals I work in California and Hawaii, that would be HIPAA. In the bank I worked in, that would be PCI DSS. Then we have advisory policies. This is where we outline what type of behaviors and activities are either acceptable or are not acceptable in our organization. In those, we would probably also have some text saying what happens if you do or do not follow that policy. This could be our print policy, our acceptable use of internet policy, or our employment policies. And as the last one, we have informative policy. They are just there for the information. That could be something about our values, our mission, and our vision. And as mentioned, policies are high level and non-specific. For the IT world, that could mean that they mention patches, updates, strong encryption, but nothing specific. It won't be this and this Windows version, this and this type of encryption, or this certain vendor. It is high level and vague, and they most often don't change. They change over time and can sometimes do it because there are changes to our procedures or our standards or the laws and regulations we need to adhere to, but in most cases, they are not updated very frequently. When we talked about the plans, the governance plan, the 3 to 5 year plan, that was strategic. The same with our policies. They are strategic. And because of that, you are most often not involved. Where you are involved is the standards. The standards are also mandatory and they're in more detail. This could describe a certain type of technology, saying all laptops have to be Windows 10, 64-bit, 8 gigs of memory, or all switches have to be Cisco switches. And when you look at the graphics over here on the right, don't look at it as importance. True, policy and standards are more important, but it is more of a we use our policies to build our standards, and then with the standards, we can find guidelines and through that make our procedures. Guidelines are non-mandatory, they are recommendations, discretionary, and they are suggestions on how you can implement something. That said, guidelines and baselines doesn't mean we can just do whatever we want as long as we follow those. Even though guidelines are discretionary and baselines are the minimum requirements, we should implement the same security across the organization. We don't have one server with this security baseline and another with a different baseline, at least not if they have the same protection profile. The larger our environment gets, the more consistency in configuration becomes important. And let's talk a little more about procedures. They are mandatory, low-level, specific, step-by-step guides. This could be a server hardening document. But with this, we want to ensure as much automation as possible. If we, for our server hardening, have 60 things that needs to be changed, ports that needs to be blocked, default accounts that needs to be removed, services that needs to be deleted, then it is much more likely that we get everything if it is automated. And finally, where the policy or strategic standards, guidelines, procedures, and benchmarks are tactical. Let's talk a little bit about users. They are, most often, our biggest security risk. Most of the time, it is not intentional. But does it really matter? We're just as compromised as if it had been intentional. It's because they don't know any better, or it's just an easier way of doing it. And that can be, to some extent, partially our fault, because it is also our job to give them the training they need to raise their awareness. Training is giving them the knowledge they need. Now they can choose to use that or not. I have sat through many security training sessions that were insanely boring, but corporate said they had to do a 2-hour training session every year, which is just wasting everybody's time and everybody's money. It doesn't do anything. What we really want is to give them training that raises their awareness. That is where they change their behavior. We are the security team. We are responsible for training and awareness. And we can do that by having more engaging training, maybe use gamification, do the training, and then have some sort of competition at the end. Maybe having an ongoing competition, because people learn and they change their habits much easier when it's something fun. I have worked in places where every month or every quarter, the team that had reported the most security events outside of IT would get half a day off and go do something fun. The security team went from getting 1, maybe 2 emails a day saying, "Hey, is this phishing?" Or "The door down here doesn't shut all the way. It's an easy way into the building," to maybe 40, 50. And that is a normal thing when you raise awareness, which is what we want, because now they know what to look for. They're going to report it more. Over time, the amount of reports will slowly decline. First off, because people just forget about it, or there's something more interesting. And secondly, we probably fix some of the problems. Remember my analogy from earlier with the super secure house where we left the door open? Think of our users as that door. If we are really good about our training, we're able to raise their awareness, well then the door is closed. If not, then it is open to some degree. The attackers are smart. They're going to go for our weakest link, which often is the user. So for us, we need to give them the right training. It needs to be at their level, something that they can understand, something they can relate to, and something that makes sense to them. And then if we, on top of that, add the gamification and there are rewards for them, even better. Another thing we can do and should do are background checks. In the US, they are very common. I don't think I've had a job here where I didn't go through a background check. In Denmark, I had one once, and that was with good reason. I was going to work in a group for the IP backbone in the largest ISP in Denmark, meaning if I wanted to, I could shut 90% of the internet down in Denmark. So in that case, background checks are probably a good idea. Background checks are administrative security controls. We go in before we hire staff and we make sure that they are who they say they are, that their references check out, that they actually have the certifications, the education that they say they do, and then we can look at their previous employment and their criminal record. In some rare cases, we can also look at their credit history. It is not super common, but it does happen. I have had mine checked once. I was applying for a job at a bank as the IT manager, so there it made sense. I actually had a student ask me not long ago, I really want to get more into IT security, but I have a bankruptcy. Can I even work there? My answer was a resounding yes. The bankruptcy may preclude him from some government jobs and a tiny portion of the financial sector, but really when they look at your credit scores, what they are looking for is for signs of fraud, not really bad financial management or whatever caused your bankruptcy. Also, very common in the US are NDAs, non-disclosure agreement, meaning while you are employed and for a certain amount of years after your employment ends, you are not allowed to talk about any proprietary or secret information, anything that can harm the business. And then at the end of an employee's employment cycle, what do? How do we make sure that we terminate them securely? This can be just they found another job. They're moving on to something different, or they're not doing their job right, or they have done something so bad that we need to terminate them. If they're just bad at what they do, or they keep making the same security mistakes over and over, well, then maybe we can coach them, we can offer them training because we want to support them. But if all that fails, then what do we do? It is now in the hands of the Human Resources Department. They will handle all the practical stuff. But we need to ensure that we are in complete coordination with them and that we stop their access to the system when it makes sense. In many places, when you give your 2 weeks notice, they shut off your access immediately. The same if you're getting fired. If they know they're going to fire you in 2 weeks, while you're in there talking to them, your access is getting cut. And it makes sense to do it at that point. If we turn it off too soon, they might figure out they're getting fired and do something stupid. If we turn it off too late, well, then we're just told, hey, we're going to fire you. And then they do something else stupid. If they do, then there are legal ramifications. And honestly, I don't think I have worked anywhere where they shut it off when I left. They pretty much worked me all the way up till the day where I left. First off, well, they pay for my time. And secondly, they wanted to ensure that I handed off my projects to whomever was taking them over. So if we deem this is not a security risk, well, then we leave the access until they have left the company. How we do this depends on our policy. Remember those? One of those policies could also govern how we handle vendors, consultants, and contractors. Just because they're not full-time employees of ours, that doesn't mean they don't need to adhere to the exact same standards. We need to make sure that they and their devices are just as secure as our own. It is your job as the IT manager or something along those lines to do your due diligence, do your due care before they get access to our facilities and our network. Exactly the same thing when we outsource or we offshore. Outsourcing is having someone else do the job, but they're probably close. That could be the example of the hospital where I worked in Hawaii. They had outsourced their entire IT infrastructure and IT teams for 15 years. It was still someone else in Honolulu that did the work. Offshoring could be what the ISP that I worked for in Denmark did with customer service. They moved all of customer service to Lithuania, where they paid people who had college degrees, master degrees in Danish to do customer support. At first, when I heard about it, it was a little weird. I mean, no one else really speaks Danish. But once I called them and got help, and the service was amazing. I mean, these were highly educated people who were really good at what they did. So maybe not the most common type of offshoring, but still a relevant example. Outsource, someone else does it for you, close by. Offshore, it is offshore, someone else still doing your work for you. And just like that, we are done with this lecture. I will see you in the next one.